How are you finding the new job, and what are the immediate challenges 9 months out from an election perhaps?
Yeah, look, I think you can never judge what's going to happen prior to an election. That'll be decisions made by the political parties themselves, and they'll go in with a strategy into an election campaign, and obviously they'll have to deal with that. But the job itself, I think, is very important because it actually gives another opportunity, another voice for rural communities and farming communities, especially to have issues raised at a high level in the government, certainly dealing with the ministers right through up into the Premier. So, you know, we can be guaranteed that the issues that we see of concern out in rural communities are taken right through. And there's a lot of consistency about those messages too. It is about, it's about land use and land use conflict. It's about water and protecting water. It's about air quality and making sure that we're dealing with that. It's about the impact it has on communities, not only the job opportunities it provides, but also impact on roads and through that safety on roads, services being provided in towns for the increased population. It's all of those things. So while there's, you know, potentially the upside, there's also potentially a bit of a downside, and it gives us an opportunity through my role to make sure that we're, you know, the government are well aware of those and trying to address those issues.
Very good. I know in the Bylong Valley there was concern expressed by New South Wales farmers about this committee review process. And there was a view expressed that the process itself didn't have any teeth. So even though a particular proposal might be deemed to have passed on only one point, it was still kind of in the game. Does that come into your sphere of influence in terms of your activities?
Yeah, not really, because that's dealing with the policy that the government and procedures the government have put in place. Obviously what they want to do is make sure that they're protecting aquifers, and they've got the aquifer interference policy in. They've got the gateway process to have a look at the agricultural issues in and around the development of mine, and people will say that, you know, they're not strong enough, and if you go to the gateway process and there are issues there, then the mine should potentially be closed. But the important part of the gateway process is that they can identify areas where the information isn't up to speed, so to speak, and they can highlight those very clearly, which they've done in some of those projects. They've highlighted that very clearly, and that's made the government focus very much on those issues. It's certainly sharpened the pencil when it comes to the companies and the expectations of the government that the companies meet a lot of those problems and concerns. So I think the process as it is now gives another avenue to build. Certainly my role goes through one way. The change in the procedure and the process, you know, makes at multiple stages they've got to go through. Now, there is disappointment in the community that some of these projects aren't stopped, but you've also got to sit back and say, well, you know, there's a lot of resources out there. We need to make sure that we assess those things properly. The government need to have proper legislation and regulation and compliance in place to deal with that. The resources are owned by the New South Wales community as a whole, and the state government are the ones who are managing that process. So, you know, they've got to take all of those things into consideration, and along with the land use conflict that comes along with it.
Could the system be improved in terms of policy when you're trying to balance the needs of mining and exploration and the needs of agriculture in critical land?
Yeah, look, I think there's you can always get processed better all the time. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think that the vast majority of governments, when they're in power, try to do things properly. I don't think there's any doubt about that either. They're very well aware of conflicts, and they want to make sure that they're not being seen or perceived to have any conflicts in those issues, so they see that as being a problem, and they obviously try to manage that. All the advice that they would be given legally would you know, make it very clear in their mind about their responsibilities that they need to deal with. So it's an issue. I think the government that's in at the moment has made substantial changes. I think there are 26 or 27 pieces of legislative change they've made throughout the 3 years in and around this area. It hasn't met the expectations of everyone, but I think they're probably having a genuine attempt to try and address the issues. And as I say, as things progress, you keep modifying things, and hopefully in the end you'll come to a good landing.
Are we focusing enough on risk management in terms of possible impacts on from extreme weather events?
Well, I think you need to take all those things into consideration, but you know, on my place, we're as dry now as we've probably ever been, so there's no streams drying up because they dried up quite a while ago. So, you know, we all as farmers do as much risk management as we possibly can. Weather conditions determine a lot of our outcomes rather than policy decisions. So I think that is an issue. I think one of the things that they've done over a long period of time is they've had a look at all the water sharing plans. They've tried to make sure they've got sustainable water use in a lot of those valleys. I think they've done that. I think if you now overlay new industries, being the CSG industry and the mining industry over that, you need to understand what the consequence of that'll be on existing industries. And as I've always said, you shouldn't be developing one industry at the expense of another industry. These industries need to work together, and they need to see whether they can take positives out of each industry to help themselves. And certainly water is one of the big issues. That's the issue that's on everybody's mind, and proper analysis of all of that needs to be done throughout the process.
Have we got the capacity in New South Wales to do the proper risk management analysis, do you think, and to do the economic and resource modelling that's necessary to make meaningful decisions? Is that process going on?
Yeah, look, I don't think there's any doubt that there's people with the skills required to do that work. I mean, they're not all confined to Canberra, and they're not all confined to some agency overseas. There are very skillful people right throughout all the different state agencies and that are quite capable of doing that work, and I think that they do that work. What they've got to do is build a level of trust and understanding around that work. I think the biggest problem is that people don't necessarily trust the independence of some of that work, which is a bigger argument rather than the quality of the work. I think the quality of the work is probably quite good in many cases.
So I can understand how where big mining companies are going to need a lot of water, farmers need a lot of water. It's really putting a lot of pressure on the system. Do you think resource development, i.e. mining, needs to be kind of more balanced in terms of the areas it picks that are vital because of their topsoil structure and the underground aquifers are we asking too much of our resources?
Look, I think you need to make sure that you're managing those resources properly. And that means that you've got a very good understanding about water and the impacts each industry, one industry on another. And as I say, there's been a lot of work done over the last few years over water sharing plans. The whole debate around the Murray-Darling Basin was because they believed that they weren't sustainable as they were. So major changes were made and water was brought back. So they have been able, in those circumstances, they've been able to manage that process and get that process through at a federal level and in conjunction with the states, eastern states which have been involved. And they did that, identifying a problem, identifying what the risks are, working out what they needed to do, and then making the changes. Certainly at the development of a new industry, they need to go through the same process, and they need to analyse things properly and understand what the impacts will be. Certainly with the CSG industry, you're extracting water out of a much deeper level, but so you need to understand the impact that that'll have on aquifers above, and that's all the work that's being done and certainly needs to continue to be done.
Jock Laurie, it's been a pleasure to catch up with you, and thank you for dropping by.